And we're live. Usually we would have the 30-second timer, so this is a bit off the wall for us tonight. Happy Thursday, guys. Just give me a wee second to I start sharing. Usually I'm prepared with the 30-second timer. Tonight we've not got the 30-second timer. Do you know, I'll never forget the time you weren't here and I forgot to put the 30-second timer on. Didn't realise we were live. Sitting there like, thank God I wasn't doing anything bad. So it was a case of I'm just sitting there, the 30-second timer's going off, and Lois is looking like this about herself, and then realise the 30-second timer isn't there. So that was great fun. But hey Noreen, how you doing, love? I'm just waiting for Nick tonight. I'm actually not going to be here tonight. I'm going to be in the background. So I am just going to talk nonsense until Nick comes. Hey.
Hi, Nicola.
Hey, Nicola, because Nick is doing his Galveston, the hurricane in 1900. So he will be giving you a slideshow, and it'll be a cross between the Nick Files and the Mystical Carousel show. That'll be this week and next week. Tomorrow, guys, we have Jenny Sullivan coming on and Richard Russell. So it will be a good show, guys. So me and Lynn are just going to sit and talk nonsense until Nick comes.
Yeah, we are.
So how has everybody's week been so far?
Well, mine's been very busy. I've been busy working. I've had a day off today. I've been down to the shops. I've built a bookshelf for my bedroom, which I was lucky. It only took about 2 months to come. Won't say from who. Yeah, I wasn't very happy about that. I've got I've got some comfrey leaves today. I've dried them out and made some salves. So I'm going to see if that works on a little bit of arthritis pain I've got coming in. So I'll let you know on that one. It's an interesting subject as well.
Please do, because you're going to be my witch doctor.
Try it on myself first. And it's all natural. It's just comfrey leaves. I'm using castor oil with it. And I've used this one with a bit of olive oil as well. But my next batch is going to be with some beeswax, some white beeswax. And I'll get it all nice. So I'll let you know how I get on. Because
that's good. Up here comes my boy.
Hey,
hi, Nick.
Hey, sorry it took a while for me to get on. It took a lot longer than I expected to get this presentation copied onto my laptop.
Okay.
That's fine. Well, guys, I am going to Love and Leavies. I'll put up the last of the comment. See how long I can stay awake for, because I've been up since 4:30, up early tomorrow again. It will be my third 12-hour shift role on the weekend. I'm off. God love you. God love you, my love.
If you could just hold off for just another minute, I'm actually going to send this in one of the other chats because I had some people that were interested in watching this. So if you could just stick around for just another minute.
Tell the truth, Nick, it's because you've missed me that much you want to see my face.
Yeah. That's what it'll be.
It is. He just wants to reach through and give me a cuddle. I don't blame the big guy. So how you been, my love?
I've been all right. I've been busy for these last few days. I mean, honestly, with this presentation, even though I've done it last year, I actually added some additional updated information that I recently had found that I thought would be great to have for the slideshow. And I literally have been doing that since I woke up this morning. So all this work that I'm doing, people would be asking, why didn't you do this the night before earlier? I had. It was just a lot more than I expected.
Well, you'll be happy to know I've explained to Lynn her job tonight. Obviously, I said I'll do the comments. So what I'll do is I'll let you go so far. When you finish your slide, I'll obviously start putting comments up. So when you see the comments, just start
I'll say it.
round them off.
Yeah, because
I will.
Yeah, because if you didn't know, Lynn, unfortunately, when I do these slideshows, I see, even though we're on StreamYard, I can't see the comments when they come up, unfortunately, even if they show up on screen. So just say something while I'm running through one of the slides.
Okay.
What you do is, this is a run off it. You go, shut up, Nick. My time.
Yeah.
By the way, I just like to point out to everybody, I don't speak to Nick like that.
Are we saying Katie Gag? Shut your mouth.
You just go, shut your face, Grandma. So just you tell me, Nick, when I'm sacked.
I'm good now. I sent the link. I was going to say I only needed a minute.
Oh, so you're saying no, I'm not good enough? So it's like pissed off, Tarzan. Well, guys, you have a wonderful show. I will be listening, and I will put up the comments every so often.
Yeah. So, and obviously, I don't know if you've said it. I don't know if you've said it yourself, Lois, but obviously, Lynn, if you didn't know, Lois has actually seen the slideshow before. She saw this last year. Obviously, it's going to be all brand new to you, though. So, since Lois is going to be kind of somewhat backstage, I mean, I'm not disappointed or anything, because like I said, you already seen the slideshow before, Lois.
Yeah. And don't worry, because I'm still supporting you, so don't you worry. I'm still here in spirit.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
But guys, have a good show and everybody enjoy. Rita, hi Rita, how you doing, love?
Okay. Well, just one other thing too, just before we get started, I don't just want to, let you know, Lynn, but everybody who's been watching, for those of you who haven't seen this before, this is actually a slideshow that I do. This is one of my few slideshows I do every year during this time of the year, because we are approaching the anniversary of the Galveston hurricane of 1900. It actually occurred on September 8th, but because September 8th, I believe, is on a weekend or so, obviously we can't do on the actual anniversary. So this is basically a story that, for whatever reason, I've been so obsessed with and fascinated by, that I just feel like this compulsion that every time during this time of the year, I always feel like I just got to tell about it for some reason. It's just such a fascinating story, but it's also a very sad story too. So I just want to let everybody know this could eventually get emotional for some people, because again, we're talking about the worst disaster that ever hit, our country. And it resulted in mass tragedies. Now, obviously, where I'm going to get started, we're not going to make it sad like immediately. That slowly gets there. We're not, but also in addition, we're not just talking about the hurricane itself. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Galveston, along with some of its previous hurricanes that it's gone through. Of course, it's all going to be really short. And we're also going to be talking about a well-known figure who actually tried everything he could to try to save Galveston from this hurricane. And that's why, give me a second here while I'm getting it ready. That's why this particular slideshow, I know it says 2 hours special. I'm going to have to change that to 2-part special next time, because it is going to be at least 2 hours. I made this 2 years ago, so it was. I had updated it. I made a lot of corrections, but I forgot that part. But anyways, it's for this very reason. It's for this very reason that this particular storm and this figure that I'm about to be talking about as well, it's no wonder why it's called Isaac's Storm, the great Galveston hurricane of 1900.
Wow.
Now, before we start getting to the historic part, I just want to do a little quick recap, which is one of the most recent updated parts of the slideshow that I added. And this is actually on the most recent storm that affected Galveston, Texas earlier this year. I'm sure you guys remember hearing this on the news. Let's start off with this. Oh, wait, that wasn't supposed to show up first, but it doesn't matter. Okay, there we go. July 8th, 2024. Galveston, Texas is in the grip of Hurricane Beryl, a Category 1 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. The eye of the storm is still several hours away, but massive waves are already crashing on the seawall. This 17-foot high barrier is the island's best hope and defense for survival. It's also a reminder of the worst natural disaster in the country's history more than almost 125 years ago.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So now this is going to be, I know the text is going to be probably small for some people, but fortunately for me, I can read it really well. So if you can't see it, don't worry, I'm going to be reading it.
George, I can't see it.
Yeah, I know. See, again, that's kind of the difficulty, but fortunately, I'm close enough to read it. So, anyways, Galveston, Texas. At the turn of the century, it's one of the most exciting cities in the United States. Known as the Wall Street of the Southwest, as it houses 5 of Texas's largest banks, it was the 5th largest city in Texas, but the wealthiest by far. It was an era of grandeur and opulence, excitement, grace, and charm. Galveston had many magnificent homes, castle-like houses, quaint Victorian cottages, and ornate business buildings, such as you see in these photographs. What makes it more interesting is that it was the first city to have electricity in Texas, along with gas lighting, telephone, telegraphs, and railroad service between the town and anywhere in the United States.
Wow.
At the 1900 census, the city's population is 37,789 people. Believe it or not, because of all these different reasons, it was actually the 3rd richest city in the United States at that time.
That's impressive, isn't it? Really, yeah.
It really is. It was just a staggering boom town during its days throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In fact, in less than 10 years, Galveston had grown by a staggering 30%. Like many port towns, Galveston is a diverse city, teeming with sailors, European immigrants, and black laborers. It's a city of well-kept churches, tree-lined boulevards, and dozens of saloons. The city was absolutely convinced beyond doubt that it was going to become the New York City of the Gulf. Galveston owes its success to good timing and geography. The island hosts a bustling deep seaport, perfectly situated to handle the country's thriving cotton and agricultural trade. The business district is headquartered in the Strand, named after a famous London street. This was the financial center not only of the Galveston County, but the entire state of Texas. Merchants could bring in goods off the boats directly out of the back of their buildings and then sell them out the fronts. There was supposed to be a fade-in, but doesn't matter. The city of Galveston, formerly founded in 1839, had weathered numerous storms, all of which the city survived with ease. In the late 19th century, Galveston was a boomtown, with the population increasing from 29,084 people in 1890, and like I said, to 37,789 in 1900. The city was... Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I'm listening.
Okay. The city was the 4th largest municipality in terms of population in the state of Texas in 1900 and had among the highest per capita income rates in the U.S. The city's position on the natural harbor of Galveston Bay along the Gulf of Mexico made it the center of trade in Texas and one of the busiest ports in the nation. With this prosperity came a sense of complacency, as residents believed any future storms would be no worse than previous events. A quarter of a century earlier, the nearby town of Indianola on Matagorda Bay was undergoing its own boom. Then, in 1875, a powerful hurricane blew through and nearly destroyed the town. Indianola was rebuilt, though a second hurricane in 1886 caused most of the town's residents to move elsewhere, along with a third hurricane that destroyed the remnants of Indianola, marking the official abandonment of the town. And this is, I was supposed to have fade-ins for this one, but this is an actual photograph of the aftermath from the second hurricane that struck Indianola.
Wow.
So, yeah, unfortunately, that town no longer exists. So because of that, many Galveston residents took the destruction of Indianola as an object lesson on the threat posed by hurricanes. Galveston is built on a low, flat island, little more than a large sandbar along the Gulf Coast, about 30 miles long and 3 miles wide, connected to the mainland by 3 railroad trestles and a wagon bridge. Its highest elevation is less than 9 feet above sea level. To the north, the shallow waters of Galveston Bay. To the south, the Gulf of Mexico. It's the perfect location for a port and strikingly vulnerable one for a city. While the north edge of the island is all business, the Gulf side is all pleasure. Galveston stroll the breezy beaches and enjoy the shades under the giant bathhouses, as you can see in this one photograph, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it was definitely, even in those days, it was a great vacation spot, not just for the locals, but for a lot of tourists as well. Now, the nearest big city is Houston, about 50 miles inland. Although Houston has 7,000 more people than Galveston, it's not nearly as prosperous or sophisticated. The two cities compete for shipping revenues, a rivalry that stirred from the late 1800s when a hurricane caused heavy damage in Galveston. Galvestonians often looked down on their neighbor to the north, as Houston was just a little country dust town, if you will, in those days. What was funny was Houston was often referred in Galveston to as Mudville, as people would often hold their noses when they talked about Houston. But Galveston, on the other hand, as you can imagine, had its tremendous sense of optimism, as it was believed to be the most prominent city on the Gulf Coast, if not in the country, and they had every reason to expect that would be the case. Houston officials, however, said it proved their city was better protected, making it more suitable for commerce. So, as for Galveston itself, on the other hand, all that stands between the sea and the city is a streetcar trestle running precariously along the shore. Hurricanes have struck the island of Galveston long before it ever became a city, and long before the United States was born, and while Texas was still considered Mexican territory. Going as far back as nearly 500 years, records show that hurricanes had previously hit the island in 1527, 1766, 1818, 1837, 1839, same year when Galveston was founded, 2 in 1842, 1854, 1877, and 1891.
Wow.
Now, many other additional hurricanes may have also hit the island through the centuries, but were probably never documented and have been lost to time.
Yeah.
For years, Galveston local officials considers building a breakwater, but the plan is dismissed and nothing had ever been approved. Galvestonians had kind of a lackadaisical attitude towards storms, as it wasn't such a big thing, at least in those days. City leaders don't want to project the image that Galveston might not be safe. These residents proposed a seawall be constructed to protect the city, but the majority of the population and the city's government dismissed their concerns, as to them it wasn't such a major concern. Now, this is where we talk about, because I said there's a historic figure involved. Among those against building a seawall was Galveston's chief weather expert, Isaac Klein. Born in near Madisonville, Tennessee on October 13th, 1861, to Jacob and Mary Klein, the older of two sons of the prosperous farmer. As a young man, Isaac develops a love for nature amid the shifting seasons of the Smoky Mountains. He spent a lot of time outdoors. Where he lived was very much the frontier, as it wasn't as advanced as other parts of the country at that point. Young Isaac is also captivated by the possibilities of a different frontier, science. In the wake of the Civil War, technology is transforming America. The telephone, electric light, and phonograph were all invented during Isaac's teenage years. And with the spread of the railroad comes the prospect that a vast and hostile land will soon be tamed. What I find fascinating, especially during Isaac Klein's early years, with all this technology that was kind of being put together, and with the railroad, that was coming together as well, especially the Transcontinental Railroad. This was an era where, especially if it involved trains, what normally would take a couple months, you'd finally get there in a couple days.
Yeah.
So you were living in an era that, we can do this and we got a bright future ahead of us. So that must have been a very proud time during Isaac's early years.
Yeah.
Now, in 1878, Isaac Klein enters nearby Hiwassee College, where he excels in mathematics, chemistry, physics, Latin, and Greek. He also develops a fascination with the cutting-edge field of meteorology. In 1882, 20-year-old Isaac is recruited and joins the Weather Service of the United States Army Signal Corps, which later is renamed the U.S. Weather Bureau. As you can see in this, that was it, the actual Weather Bureau, I believe, down in Galveston. At this time, the Weather Bureau is just a far-flung system of observation, posts scattered around the country. Its forecasts are notoriously inaccurate, and its observers have a reputation for incompetence and corruption. There was a lot of scandals going on. A lot of the offices were being used for other activities besides studying meteorology. This is going to sound crazy of what I'm about to say, but it's a little funny, but at the same time, it was not such a good thing back in that era. There was a chief of one of the Weather Bureau offices, in addition to observing the weather, was fairly observant of other things. He was taking photographs of nude women, which was considered quite scandalous at that time. So to survive, the Weather Bureau would have to clean up its act. Isaac Klein, being very forthright and a straight-back man, was considered the Weather Bureau's great hopes. He was intelligent, he was aware, and participated in the latest scientific investigations of his day, and he wanted to bring that expertise and that level of professional behavior and department or demeanor to the Weather Service. He rose through the ranks in various cities. See, there was another one that doesn't have a fade in with that. Okay. Isaac begins his career as a forecaster in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1883 in order to take daily readings as well as to observe the Rocky Mountain locusts and the relationship between their behavior and the climate. And that is an actual photograph of the Rocky Mountain locusts. Those have since been extinct. We don't have them anymore.
Oh.
I will say this. I mean, I could save it for a different slideshow if I ever put one together, but the Rocky Mountain locust was literally one of the most destructive insects we ever had here in the United States.
Yeah.
In fact, in 1875, they actually created one of the largest swarms of insects or animals of any kind ever put together. And it was later called Albert's swarm because there was a meteorologist by the name of Albert that studied the Rocky Mountain locust during this entire craze that happened. That swarm at one point was like 1,800 miles long.
Wow.
It was huge. I mean, they said it was supposedly like 4 trillion individuals. Of course, we'll never know the true number of them, but they were among some. They literally destroyed everything. They ate crops. They ate parts of farms. I mean, they would eat anything they could find.
Wow.
And that's when it was basically one of the few insects that people even then said, we got to get rid of this. We got to make this thing extinct.
Oh, yeah.
And I think through a lot of the farming technology that exists in the days, it destroyed a lot of their eggs eventually because they said the last reported sighting of the Rocky Mountain locust was in 1902 when there was a small swarm that was seen in Manitoba, Canada. And then after that, it was never seen again. So this photograph is a very rare image of live not specimens, but live Rocky Mountain Rocky Mountain locusts. This was actually taken in the 1870s. I don't know if it was taken during the swarm or a separate event, but that's one of the very few photographs of live individuals. So the locusts evidently learned that Isaac, had been put on their trail and disappeared. The central responsibility of any weather observer was to make a serious and very detailed weather observations, always at the same time each day. Of course, things were really limited back then. Basically, what they could see is what they could measure. They could measure the temperature with thermometers, as well as pressure with barometers. Some of them had hydrometers to measure the humidity, which was about it, as they were very focused on just what they could see right in their immediate vicinity. Of course, you also have to remember, too, there were no radars or Doppler radars at that time. So it doesn't take long for Isaac to make a name for himself within the Bureau. He had an inexhaustible level of energy and curiosity. He was a multitasker before the term had ever been invented. In addition, in spare time in Little Rock to doing all the observations that were demanded of a full-time observer, he went to medical school, graduated and earned a Doctor of Medicine from the University of Arkansas in 1885 and became a physician. He also begins duties at Fort Concho Weather Station. Later, in Abilene, Texas, he helps edit The Reporter, which was a daily and weekly newspaper. Isaac was very ahead of his time and was very well respected because he had 2 college degrees. Most people at that time only had 4th grade education or less. So Isaac even finds time for less scientific pursuits. In 1886, after being transferred to Abilene, Texas, he met Cora May Bellew, an organist at the local church. Within a year, they married on March 17, 1887.
Oh.
Isaac Klein had a reputation for being a very stern person. Cora May, on the other hand, was someone who everyone loved. She had, of course, the pictures in black and white, but based on descriptions, she had long red hair and was supposed to be a lot of fun, very warm, friendly, outgoing, and gregarious. On December 10th, their first child, Allie Mae, was born. 2 more daughters, Rosemary and Esther, are born over the next 6 years. In March 1889, 27-year-old Isaac received an honorable assignment. A Texas section of the Weather Bureau was being established, and he is chosen to head the U.S. Weather Bureau's office in the thriving port city of Galveston to organize and oversee it. Isaac Klein and his family arrive in the early part of that year and are nearly overwhelmed by their good fortune. Galveston was very much the city on the rise and the city on the make with tremendous aspirations. And that was the environment that Isaac walked into.
Yeah.
However, and even though this was still several years away, but Isaac has no way of knowing the calamity that lies ahead. Already, the seeds of disaster are being sown.
Oh, God.
By decade's end, his faith in the power of science will come face to face with the deadliest storm in American history. Now, just before we continue on, I just want to take a look at the comments real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so Lois if you could show those, Lois, thank you very much. Yep, like I said, Rhea, this is one of my annual presentations. Hey, Jeff, good to see you. We're doing really well. I'm a good storyteller. Yes, I am. Hey, what's up, Adrian? Good to see you. You know, Adrian. Hello, David.
Hello.
You know, Adrian, I believe, if I'm correct, I think she said she's been down to Galveston herself. So I know a couple people who live throughout the city, and they'll tell you that memory of this hurricane has never gone away. So
Wow.
we're going to get into more detail with that in just a couple more minutes, just before we get into that main topic. By 1890, 28-year-old Isaac Klein settles in as head of the city's U.S. Weather Bureau office, which is located on the 3rd floor of the Levy Building on 23rd Street in the heart of downtown Galveston. And for some reason, the picture's not showing up, but I'm sure it will eventually. Isaac was really one of the best and the brightest of the new Weather Bureau. He was actually put in charge of the entire Texas district, which covered a vast area, which represented the amount of faith that the Weather Bureau had in him. There it is. That's the picture of the Levy building.
Wow.
He spends each day taking readings and collecting meteorological data. The study and science of weather depended on very rigorous, detailed, and most people might argue tedious rituals of observation, and it was at this that Isaac Klein absolutely excelled. He was precise almost to a fault. Each day, Klein and his staff telegraphed the data they collected to Weather Bureau headquarters in Washington, D.C. They would be quickly processed by the forecasters in Washington, who would then send this possible relay forecast back to each office. Isaac's hard-working demeanor immediately endears him to Galvestonians. He was a trusted member of the community and a churchgoer. When he walked down the street, people knew who he was. For Isaac, every day is a reminder of his good fortune. Klein stayed with the office when it became part of the U.S. Weather Bureau in the 1891 transfer from the Signal Corps to the Department of Agriculture. In 1892, Isaac's younger brother, there it is. Isaac's younger brother, 21-year-old Joseph Klein, also began work as a meteorologist at the Galveston Weather Bureau. He soon becomes just as competent in the field as his brother. Joseph very clearly wanted to be a great weatherman and wanted very much to best his elder brother Isaac. So he was kind of in that situation where he was kind of in the shadow of the older brother. So in 1895, Klein introduces the Weather Bureau to the 24 to 36 hour forecasts. That same year, the Klein brothers receive a new boss when President Grover Cleveland names 39-year-old Willis Moore to head the National Weather Bureau, who was a very controlling and very ambitious man who was seen as a stepping stone toward greater things. One of his top priorities was to bring the Weather Bureau a higher level of credibility. During his time in Galveston, aside from running the weather office, Isaac Klein also taught Sunday school at his church, was a professor at the local medical college, and in 1896 earned a Doctor of Philosophy degree from Rand Male and Female College, now today as Texas Christian University. And I know that school all too well. In fact, I have a few friends of mine who actually attended and graduated from that college. But the consequences of Moore's ambition will soon leave the city of Galveston dangerously vulnerable.
Wow.
In years past, those local observations would have included data from Cuban forecasters who had pioneered the science of hurricane prediction. In April 1898, 2 months after the sinking of the USS Maine off the coast of Cuba, the Spanish-American War begins. For years, the U.S. Weather Bureau had relied on Cuban observers to transmit storm warnings to the American mainland. Here's the thing. We, at that time too, for us American, meteorologists and forecasters, we were just kind of getting into it ourselves. We hadn't been as long as the Cubans have been, heavily involved in this field. So, but now with Cuba under U.S. military control, the Weather Bureau installed and assigns its own observers to the island. The U.S. weather observers felt that the residents of Cuba were a little better than Aboriginals. They also felt a little bit threatened by the Cuban meteorologists. Washington believed the Americans were more scientific and therefore more credible than their Cuban counterparts. But you got to admit, though, however, back in the 1890s and early part of the 20th century, the Cuban forecasters were probably the best in the world for understanding and predicting hurricanes. Yeah. They not only had some very good station observations with barometers and anemometers to measure the winds, but they also had a good idea of how the physics worked in hurricanes. In fact, the Cubans had a far better track record and well-deserved reputation for accuracy. That same year of 1898, as well as into 1899, Isaac Klein also spends time in Mexico, where he establishes weather stations for use in forecasting weather for the U.S. fleet that was fighting the Spanish fleet in the Caribbean and West Indies. In August of 1900, Willis Moore moves to silence the Cuban forecasters altogether. At the peak of hurricane season, He decrees that only weather information gathered by U.S. observers can be sent over public telegraph lines. And that was widely protested by the Cuban meteorologists, as you can imagine, as being not merely completely arrogant, but so indefensible because this was hurricane season.
Yeah.
This was the time when people most needed to have the best and most accurate projections that people at the time could get. This would later prove to be a fatal mistake. But in addition to that, too, Isaac Klein actually wrote an article in 1891 in the Galveston Daily News in which he gave his official meteorological opinion and does its best to dispel any lingering fears. He said that the thought of a hurricane ever doing serious harm to Galveston was a crazy idea and believed a seawall was not needed due to his belief that a strong hurricane would not strike the island. Many residents have called for a seawall to protect the city, as I said before, but Klein's statement helped to prevent its construction. As a result, the seawall was not built, and development activities on the island actively increased its vulnerability to storms. Sand dunes along the shore were cut down to fill low areas in the city, removing what little barrier there was to the Gulf of Mexico. That same article, published in the Galveston News years earlier, claimed it would be impossible for any cyclone to create a storm wave which would materially injure the city. The continental shelf is very shallow, so we felt the waters would spread out. It would not be able to bring up any big waves or a giant storm surge. He declared the city safe from hurricanes. He encouraged the development along Galveston because he thought and was very certain that Galveston would be protected from the storm surge because of the shallow waters. Isaac clearly believed in his own predictions because he builds a stately house just 3 blocks away from the beach and moves in shortly afterwards with his wife Cora May and 3 young daughters. His brother Joseph also moves in with them. Perched on stills, the house rests above 2 feet above the highest watermark ever recorded in Galveston. Unfortunately, in spite of my constant research, I couldn't find a photograph of their house. So either no photos were taken of the house itself, or if there was, they probably been lost to time. The prevailing belief among his neighbors was that this house was the strongest building ever constructed and would withstand anything that the island had been delivered. The Klein brothers worked together at the Galveston Weather Bureau office located downtown in the Levy building. Readings are made and recorded with the utmost precision. When foul weather is in Galveston's forecast, signal flags are hoisted over the Levy building's roof, which indicates the storm's type and direction. Tropical storms are not uncommon along the Gulf Coast, and islanders take them in stride. A red and black flag on the top of the Levy building usually means foul weather is on the way. The other one didn't show up, but there we go. Two flags would indicate the approach of a hurricane, but that warning was hardly ever given. Meanwhile, a storm is starting to pick up speed, but thousands of miles away along the Texas coast, the city of Galveston is unaware of the unprecedented devastation and death soon to be heading their way. And Isaac Klein is about to discover the danger of thinking that one can ever know it all. So let me just go back just to the comments are still pretty much the same, so there hasn't really
yeah.
So we'll just move on. Is there anything in particular you want to say, Lynn, about this before I start the next part?
Do you know what? I think it's really interesting what you're telling. You give us all this history up to now. It's like a build up to what's going to be happening. Amazing. And how this started from nothing and it's just built its way up. I mean, even down to the flags, it's like going on a beach. You've got red flag for danger and then 2, a green flag for okay. But it's all sort of fitting. And it's like we're listening to something progress, aren't we? It's historical. It's really good. It's interesting.
I will admit that I actually got a lot of this from 2 different documentaries, but the way how they told them was so fascinating. And of course, not everyone's going to, be able to take time to really watch it. So I just thought, well, if they're not going to have time to watch it, why not bring that information to them? And being actually told by somebody who learned a lot of this from and spent hours putting this together. This was not an easy slideshow, I can tell you right now.
Yeah, but it's interesting, really good. But I can't wait through this. Go on.
Yeah. Okay, so this is really small, but fortunately, I can still read this. You can kind of say this kind of goes into chapters almost. So we kind of just gone through almost like almost the first 2 chapters. I would kind of say this is like chapter 3 now, because this is where we really start going into the real business. Because as it says here, sometime near the end of August 1900, a small storm takes shape between Africa and the Caribbean and emerged into the Atlantic Ocean. However, this is not completely certain because of the limited observational methods available in contemporary meteorologists, with ship reports being the only reliable tool for observing hurricanes. The first formal sighting of the tropical storm occurred on August 27th, about 1,000 miles east of the Windward Islands, when a ship encountered an area of unsettled weather. The storm moved off the coast of West Africa and continued as a really fairly modest tropical cyclone for most of the way across the Atlantic. Over the next couple days, the system moved northwestwards, and it is thought to have maintained its intensity as a weak tropical storm before it passed through the Leeward Islands and entered the Caribbean Sea on August 31st. By then, it has traveled due west and is about 200 miles south of Puerto Rico. On Saturday, September 1st, Father Lorenzo Gangoit, if I'm saying that correctly, the director of the Bellum College Observatory in Havana, Cuba, noted that the storm was in its formative stages, with only vague indications of a small tropical cyclone to the southwest of St. Croix. It continues its march, moving across the Dominican Republic and Haiti before changing course. And Antigua reported a severe thunderstorm passing over on August 30th, with lower barometric pressure and 2.6 inches of rain on the island. In Puerto Rico, the storm produced winds of up to 43 miles per hour at San Juan. In Jamaica, heavy rainfall from the storm caused all rivers to swell. Floodwaters severely damaged banana plantations and washed away miles of railroads. So you can already see the storms. Even though it only existed for a few days, you could already tell this was becoming an increasingly powerful storm.
Yeah.
Damage estimates range in the thousands of British pounds, because at that time, too, that was when Jamaica was still British territory, I believe.
Right.
Monday, September 3rd, the system made landfall on Cuba near Santiago de Cuba. For the next 2 days, torrential rains pummel the island before it moves slowly west-northwestward across the island, including a peak 24-hour total of 12.58 inches in the city of Santiago de Cuba.
Oof.
The city experienced its worst weather since 1877. The southern end of the city was submerged with about 5 feet of water. Firefighters and police rescued and aided stranded residents. St. George, a German steamer, ran aground at Daiquiri, if I'm saying that right. A telegraph from the mayor of Trinidad, who was asking for assistance from the U.S. occupation government, indicated that the storm destroyed all crops and left many people destitute. It then emerged into Straits of Florida as a tropical storm on September 5th. As the system emerged into the Straits of Florida, Gangoid observed a large persistent halo around the moon, while the sky turned deep red and cirrus clouds moved northwards. This indicated to him that the tropical storm had intensified and that the prevailing winds were moving the system towards the coast of Texas. However, the United States Weather Bureau disagreed with this forecast, as they expected the system to recurve and make landfall in Florida. An area of high pressure over the Florida Keys ultimately moved the system southwestward into the Gulf of Mexico, where favorable conditions such as warm sea surface temperatures allowed the storm to intensify into a hurricane. That's the thing. Once you have this intense system and the mechanism of everything that puts it together, once the winds reach 74 miles per hour, then you got a hurricane.
Wow.
Tuesday, September 4th. 38-year-old Isaac Klein receives an advisory telegraph from the Washington Bureau about a tropical storm disturbance moving northward over Cuba. Isaac takes note, but is not alarmed. Additionally, neither this telegraph or any further updates mention this is a really important part of this actually. Additionally, neither this telegraph or any further updates mention the word hurricane.
Right.
At this, you also have to remember too, at this time, they discourage the use of terms such as hurricane or tornado to avoid panicking residents in the path of any storm event. So that ban, if you will, didn't become upheld until literally the 1950s. So we're talking still well over 50 years before the word hurricane or tornado could ever be used in a forecast. So, and there were even stories I've heard where meteorologists actually lost their jobs because they used the word hurricane or tornado during these forecasts. I mean, wow. Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I mean, like you think about it now, that absolutely sounds completely ridiculous and crazy. Yeah. But that was that era in those days because they didn't want to cause the public to panic, obviously.
Yeah.
So Wednesday, September 5th, initially as the storm moved across Cuba and into the extreme southeastern Gulf of Mexico, all the indications by the American weather observers in Cuba were that the storm was going to move north, which would take it into Florida and ultimately up the East Coast. As you can see from this map, I mean, not necessarily, but it's the projected path, but this is what I think they originally were trying to predict. The typical path, this was usually the typical path for what looks to them like an ordinary tropical storm.
Yeah.
As a result, the Central Office of the Weather Bureau issued a storm warning in Florida from Cedar Key to Miami on that day. Between the U.S. Weather Bureau's weather observers, there was nothing really to be concerned about the storm. And yet the Cubans, who have had experience with many different kinds of hurricanes, knew that something was off. The Cubans are convinced the storm will veer west toward the Gulf of Mexico. The Weather Bureau forecasters had no way of knowing the storm's trajectory, but because Willis Moore, the head of the U.S. Weather Bureau, has cut off their access to telegraph lines due to tensions in the aftermath of the Spanish-American War, their concerns never make it to the mainland. Moore also changed protocol to force local Weather Bureau offices to seek authorization from the central office before issuing storm warnings. It's a forecast Galveston never hears.
Yeah.
An area of high pressure over the Florida Keys ultimately moved the system northwestward. It seems like it's repeating some of the information, but I'll read it anyway. Moved northwestward into the Gulf of Mexico, where favorable conditions such as warm sea surface temperatures allowed the storm to intensify into a hurricane and begins moving north. News of the storm reaches Galveston that day, but it barely even makes the papers, and no one paid very much attention. Tropical storms, like I said, were not unusual in this part of the world, as Galvestonians were very familiar with them. People thought that the Weather Bureau would keep them apprised and what was coming. Meanwhile, atop their office of the Levy building, the Klein brothers keep a close watch on their instrumentation. Isaac has seen the reports and the regular updates about the storm out of Cuba from headquarters in Washington, D.C., but remains confident that no storm would ever seriously harm the city. But all his certainties are about to be washed away by a catastrophe of almost unimaginable scale. Thursday, September 6th. Hurricane warnings are issued for the coast of Louisiana and points east. Later that day, the warning is in effect along the coast from Cedar Key to Savannah, Georgia, while storm warnings were displayed from Charleston, South Carolina to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, as well as from Pensacola, Florida. Advisories are given as far north as Boston, Massachusetts. In the eastern Gulf of Mexico, the ship Louisiana encountered the hurricane, whose captain T.P. Halsey estimated that the system had wind speeds of 100 miles per hour.
Ooh.
The hurricane continued to strengthen significantly while heading west-northwestward across the Gulf. Observers on the Mississippi and Louisiana coast report storm damage overnight. Cuban forecasters adamantly disagreed with the Weather Bureau, saying the hurricane would continue west. One Cuban forecaster predicted the hurricane would continue into central Texas near San Antonio. Back in Galveston, it was pretty much an ordinary summer day, on the other hand. Isaac Klein, as usual, went to the top of the Levy building to check his instruments. Temperatures was 90.5 degrees, quite hot, especially given the humidity. Isaac Klein monitored the cloud cover and winds, but there was nothing of unusual or extraordinary about the day. The report from Washington states that the storm is passing over Florida and heading up the Atlantic coast towards New England. When this storm came off of Cuba, it turned north and went just to the west of the Florida Keys and then paralleled the most southern part of the Florida peninsula. Isaac Klein leaves work that night, confident that the Bureau's forecast is correct and that once again, Galveston will be spared the sea's fury. But nature has a different plan in mind. Friday, September 7th. Sometime that night, the storm shifts west toward the Gulf of Mexico. It is where, and this was probably the worst. This is where things really started going downhill completely. This is where things went really bad because that's where they lost track of it. It was where track of the storm was lost, is it was far away from land and it was out in the open water. And at the time, what they knew of storms is that they keep moving north, but their assumption was proven to be wrong. As it traveled through the Gulf of Mexico, which was already superheated from the especially hot summer, it basically acted as a heat engine with an inexhaustible supply of energy to draw upon. The wind speed builds as the storm feeds ravenously on the heat of the Gulf water. It keeps strengthening, and like I said before, once it reaches up to 74, winds up to 74 miles per hour, a hurricane is born. This giant storm was moving forward probably at about 10 miles an hour, which is usually the average speed for a typical hurricane, very slowly and significantly, because as it moves, building more and more power, suddenly this fairly routine tropical cyclone became a massive and destructive beast. The system reached its peak intensity with estimated sustained winds of up to 145 miles per hour, which made it equivalent to a Category 4 hurricane on the modern-day Saffir-Simpson scale. That day, the Weather Bureau realized that the storm was continuing west-west. See, it's saying the same thing again, west-northwestward across the Gulf of Mexico, rather than turning northward over Florida and the East Coast that it had predicted. In Galveston, the day begins with little indication that a marauding force is sweeping across the Gulf of Mexico toward the island. Isaac Klein remains unaware that a hurricane is heading their way. That morning, he stands on the city's Gulf shore and carefully surveys the sea. What was happening that Friday morning was a strong wind was coming out of the northwest and the tide was rising, which was an unusual circumstance. When the wind is out of the north, and people in Galveston joke about this, a person could almost walk across Galveston Bay as the wind from the north was literally driving water out of the bay. He knew the name for this, as this was called a storm tide. They started getting swells, which were little larger waves that came farther apart and pounded up on the beaches with a different sound than the standard waves. Far in advance of hurricanes, these fairly large waves that come in long intervals, maybe a couple minutes in between each, and are actually swells that are generated by the hurricane, and they move way in advance of the storm. So it acts as kind of like a precursor. When Isaac returns to the office, a new report has been received from headquarters in Washington, D.C. The tropical storm they thought was heading north has now veered west, and Galveston should brace for high winds and heavy rain. Isaac isn't worried, as he himself had written 9 years earlier that the thought that any storm could seriously damage Galveston is an absurd delusion. While the day is hot and humid, The barometer isn't showing any signs of falling and wind speed remains stable. Somewhere out in the Gulf, ships are being lashed by the hurricane, but Isaac has no way of knowing. There is no ship to shore at this point. So even if a ship encountered this hurricane, they had no way of getting word to shore. So Klein, so this was basically a nightmare unfolding. So Klein and the other weather stations are relying only upon other land-based weather forecasting installations. Isaac Klein puts all of his faith in those limited tools. Like many of his era, he believes that the technology right in front of him is all that he needs. As the city swelters under a heat wave, Klein, however, raises a red and black flag on the top of the Levy building, warning residents of an approaching storm. It was one of the hottest periods ever in Galveston's history. The humidity is almost unbearable. According to what I remember hearing about, I didn't have this, but according to what I heard, it was like 95-degree weather that day with 95% humidity. So
Wow.
you can imagine that definitely was unbearable.
Yeah.
The waves lapping against Galveston shores are as warm as bathwater. So the beaches are filled with bathers taking advantage of Galveston's Gulfside locale. Playing in the surf and the island's bathhouses provides a little relief. So, and of course, the bathhouse is made of entirely out of wood. They sit on a jetty that stretches more than 100 feet out over the water. So, I already wrote that. I'm going to skip that one. Among them, and you have to remember too, like the waters certainly were quite warm, especially in this type of temperature. But like I said, it definitely provided relief for whatever, cooling areas that people could have in those days because they didn't have air conditionings back then yet. I don't know if you could hear that noise in the background. Sorry about that.
No, can't hear it.
No, there was a noise in the background. My dad's working out in the backyard. He just turned on a hose. So if you guys hear that, that's basically what that noise is. Real quick on the comments. Big old Tom's in the house. You have to wonder. The band of Scorpions was around back then. What word would you have? Replace Rocky like a hurricane. Well, and that was obvious. Truth be told, that this was before The Simpsons, Tom. All right. Anyways, going back. So, like I said, with all these people that were using the beaches, among them are the children. Okay, this was, I don't know why they didn't show up sooner. Among them are the children who live at the nearby St. Mary's Orphanage, and this is a photo of the orphanage. The orphanage, founded in 1866, and was also the first children's hospital in the state, was a wonderful beachfront property, but at the same time, a rather large, gloomy castle-like structure, which consisted of two-story dormitories with big balconies overlooking the Gulf, and were right off the beach, just behind salt cedar trees and sand dunes, just sort of rising from this flat portion of Galveston among the seagrass. The location seemed ideal, as it was far from town and the threat of yellow fever, which was persisting at that time. And also, there were 93 children and 10 sisters at this orphanage. They watch as the waves crash noisily into the Galveston shore. That evening, however, the winds turn calm and the bright moon shines down. The Klein brothers finish their work and return to their family. Isaac's wife, Cora May, is pregnant with their fourth child and retires early. By midnight, Isaac is asleep as well. A city sleeps, unaware that the hurricane out in the Gulf is becoming a monster and is heading their way. Now, Isaac's home, being only 3 blocks away from the beach, is close enough to feel the reverberations from the pounding sound. That night, he awakens to the persistent sense that something is not right, but as usual had no particular concern that anything was coming. He falls back to his sleep in his impregnable house, feeling safe and secure. There is one man in Galveston, however, who is very concerned. In fact, he's certain that death is riding on these Gulf waves. At about 4 a.m. that morning, 30-year-old Joseph wakes up and began to feel very concerned and feared that death and destruction was close by. Joseph looks out a window and sees the backyard is under several inches of water. He knocks on Isaac's door and wakes his older brother, as Joseph has the sense of impending doom and believed that floodwaters were coming in and approaching the house. Together, they go to the beachfront and they saw these great waves breaking on the south shore. They also noted that the winds were coming in strong from the north and the tide moving up towards the center of the city. Joseph believed that the worst was about to happen, but Isaac dismissed his concerns and said that he will be the one who will determine whether or not to notify Washington, D.C. of anything unusual happening that day. Isaac assures his brother that they can check their instruments in the morning to see if Joseph's premonitions have any basis in actual science. Now, unfortunately, unaware of the danger approaching them, the hurricane is relentlessly making its way toward the island.
Right.
120-foot swells ripple across the Gulf. Winds over 150 miles per hour scream westward along the open sea. Pressure plummets around its eye, and spiraling winds carry air at over 1 million tons per second. And now the key part of the storm is an area known as the eye wall. It's the intense band of convection that forms around the center of low pressure. The very high winds are concentrated around the core of thunderstorms in the middle of the hurricane. Along the eye wall, the wind begins to blow so fast that they create a centrifugal force. They are literally lifting the surface of the sea, creating a huge circular formation that stretches up to 2 miles above the open water. Wow. The ocean rushes outward from the course of the storm, producing what is often the most dangerous, lethal, and often deadliest part of the hurricane, the storm surge. Storm surges are obviously the most, like I said, the most deadliest part of the hurricane. You just have all this water basically being forced upwards, basically. If you kind of take it into a certain example, like if you say, for example, if you had a plate and you put a little water on it and then you blow the water on the plate, what's going to happen, obviously, when you do that? That water is going to come off the plate. Same way when it comes to a hurricane where it blows all this water in different directions. And when you have storm levels that reach, or storm waves, if you will, that reach 10, 15, 20, 25 feet, people drown.
Yeah.
Right. That massive water is now heading straight for Galveston, Texas, a city where the highest elevation is just only 8 feet above sea level. In 24 hours, Galveston will make history as the site of America's deadliest natural disaster. Saturday, September 8th, 1900. Residents wake up to a Saturday morning newspaper that the hurricane will change its course or spend its force before reaching Texas. The anemometer at Klein's office registered sustained winds of 80 miles per hour by late afternoon. Within an hour, the wind speed was 100 miles per hour and climbing. Isaac returns to the beach and once again observes the high, slow swells. He clearly knows that this was unusual behavior for the Gulf of Mexico and was not at all certain what it indicated, and indeed failed to recognize that the swells were an indication of tremendous energy being brought forward from a large storm. Isaac hurries to his downtown office in the Levy building and notices the barometric pressure has dropped just 1/10 of an inch, only slightly since the night before. In a telegraph to Washington, however, he does mention one striking phenomenon: such high water with opposing winds, never observed previously, he writes. He had no idea that life was about to change in a way that no one could ever have conceived. Official forecasts issued from the Weather Bureau in Washington headquarters are based on observations transmitted from local offices. watching the sea creep inexorably inward from the beach, flooding block after block. Isaac Klein recognized the disaster that was about to befall the city. Excuse me.
Okay.
At 2:30 p.m., he dispatched his brother Joseph, who was also his assistant, with a message for Weather Bureau headquarters in Washington. It reported that half the city was underwater, and Joseph remarked later that he had realized the full extent of the situation at the time he sent it. He could have amended to entire city now underwater. Joseph waded through waist-deep water and floating debris to the telegraph office, only to be told that the lines had been dead for hours. One phone line to the main line still functioned, however, and the intervention of a friend who worked at the local telephone company moved Joseph's call ahead of 4,000 others waiting to be connected by the Galveston operator. His enciphered message to Washington reached the Western Union Telegraph office in Houston just before the telephone line, too, went dead. It read in part, "A great calamity is upon us. By the end of the day, this city will find out just how high these ocean waters can go and how much life they can sweep away." Oh, so now I forgot to mention this earlier. Now, this part of the slideshow, I got quite a couple slides of this. I got a couple videos that I'm going to present. I'm just going to do a quick test play just to make sure if you could hear it or if anybody could hear it for those who are watching. But
Okay.
what these videos are, they're from actually these two documentaries actually, and these are survivor accounts of what people wrote during that terrible day. They're not very long videos though. This is actually only about 8 seconds, so I'm just going to do a quick test run, and let me know if you could hear it.
All right.
No one even faintly suspected.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm just going to play it one more time then.
No one even faintly suspected the disastrous
Yes.
tidal wave that was so swiftly moving in from the depths of the Gulf.
So that was just an example of it. Just before I continue, I just want to go back to the comments. Okay, comments are still the same, so we'll head back. On Saturday morning, the swells persisted despite only partly cloudy skies, largely because of the unremarkable weather. Few residents saw cause for concern. As a result, residents were expecting a rainy, windy afternoon at worst, but continued going about their business. After 8 a.m., heavy rain began to fall on the island. Few people evacuated across Galveston's bridges to the mainland, and the majority of the population was unconcerned by the rain clouds that began rolling in by mid-morning. As the tides began to shift inland, several inches of water began running up and began pouring in the center of town and low-lying streets. That morning, Isaac tells several people that while there will be a storm that day, he expects only minor flooding. They're just now getting the increasingly heavy outer squalls, and by mid-morning, they get constant rain. So they're getting into the core of the storm. Soon, the wind reaches 40 miles per hour, and water begins flowing into Galveston's low-lying streets. Yeah, this is one of the few photographs I was able to find of the flooding.
Wow.
Still, but surprisingly, the city goes about its routine. People celebrate the end of the summer and heat wave that plagued them for days, as well at this point. So many people were out, enjoying, even though it was flooding their streets. It was, with all this water coming in, it was a relief to everybody. Actually, and the other thing too is that most of the accounts that I read, children were actually out playing in the streets. And I got a video of that too as an example. This time, it's from not only do I have survivor accounts, I also have clips from one of the other documentaries that interviews actual descendants of survivors. And the first person that I'm going to be presenting is someone by the name of Linda McDonald. She's a well-known historian in Galveston. She's a granddaughter of a survivor. She's been featured on most of these documentaries on the Galveston hurricane. But like I said, going back to what I was saying, that kids were out playing, well, this is quite an example.
My
grandfather was 6 years old at the time of the storm, and he tells me that morning he was out playing, and he said it was a lot of fun because the streets were then flooded, and they could take sticks, and they would put the sticks, which they considered to be big ships, and race them down the street. They would look at the beautiful waves crashing, and they'd go, wow, that's awesome.
The light-hearted atmosphere. I mean, seeing again, everyone was, there was a story too. I remember hearing of that there was a well-known rabbi who lived in the town of Galveston, and he often would give a lot of assistance to everybody outside because of the constant rain. Just like a lot of people from those days, he would actually go out and he would give umbrellas to different residents to protect them from the rain, and his wife would be giving apples to it was just, people just didn't really have much worry. It was just such a relaxing moment. Everybody's having a good time, and again, there was just no real worry for the most part. But the lighthearted atmosphere, however, is short-lived as the winds pick up speed and people watch the waves getting higher and higher and pushed further inland. At the beach, residents watch as the surf pounds the bathhouses and breaks them apart. People then began to realize that a serious disaster was unfolding right in front of them. I mean, that's when they finally came to that realization that, maybe this was not so fun or funny as originally they thought it was. They started realizing that this was something far more different. 9 a.m. The hurricane is about 50 miles off the coast. 150-mile-per-hour winds are already pushing huge waves up against the coastline. The storm is probably at its same intensity that it's going to make it landfall, and Galvestonians have no idea of the monster lurking in the Gulf. Their own weather expert, Isaac Klein, has not raised the hurricane warning flag above the U.S. Weather Bureau's office in the Levy building. Oh, that's weird. I don't know why it showed up that way. Sister Elizabeth Ryan, one of 10 sisters at St. Mary's Orphanage, had come into town that morning to collect food. Despite pleas from Mother Gabriel, the assistant superior of St. Mary's Infirmary, for her to stay at the hospital until the storm passed, Sister Elizabeth said she had to return to the orphanage. Sister Elizabeth said that she had the provisions in the wagon, and if she did not return, the children would have no supper. She didn't know that whether she returned or not, there would be no more suppers at the orphanage.
Oh.
At St. Mary's Orphanage, high waves eat away at the sand dunes, which acted as a natural barrier between the Gulf and the orphanage. The sisters and children that happened to be outside watch in shock and disbelief as they watch these sand dunes just disappear like they were made of flour.
Wow.
With the waters of the Gulf getting closer to the dormitories, the sisters then took all of the children to the girls' dormitory because it was the newer, sturdier, and stronger of the two. Just after 10 a.m., the Galveston Weather Bureau gets a telegram from Washington, D.C., predicting that the wind direction will change from northwest to northeast. Joseph Klein replies with a quick response, reporting heavy rain, thunderstorm activity, and a falling barometer. He then returns to the roof of the Levy building and discovers that the rain gauge has blown away. Winds are an estimated 42 miles per hour, and the barometer has fallen slightly. The streets of Galveston have been flooded into angry rivers, with each wave rolling up underneath the houses and begins to wear away the foundations. In the first floor chapel at St. Mary's Orphanage, the sisters huddle inside with the 93 children. Realizing that they were under threat, the sisters gathered the terrified children in the chapel and had them sing the song Queen of the Waves repeatedly as an attempt to calm them down. Which, for those that don't know, it was an old French hymn that was sung by sailors during bad storms, seeking the protection of Mary, Mother of Jesus. They sing while the sisters pray. The waters, however, kept rising, and eventually the Gulf waters approached the front steps of that dormitory. Now, I got another video here. This one I actually put together myself. Now, typical when it comes to the anniversary of the Galveston hurricane, that song, Queen of the Waves, is often usually played during that memorial service. I know they'll probably do it next year because next year will be the 125th anniversary of this hurricane. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to play that song, as a matter of fact, which I've played it before. I didn't have any copyright issues as far as I'm concerned. And the song's about 2.5 minutes. And this is probably the most notorious version of it because it has actually been used in these documentaries. So for those of you who've never heard it, I'm going to play the song now, and it will be accompanied by different photos and illustrations of the devastation of this orphanage.
Okay.
Queen of the waves, look forth across the ocean, from north to south, from east to stormy west. See how the waters with tumultuous motion rise up and flow, without a pause or rest. But fear we not, the storm clouds round us gather. Thou art our mother, and thy little child is the all-merciful, our loving brother, God of the sea and of the tempest wild. Help then, sweet Queen, in our exceeding danger, by thy 7 griefs, and pity save. Think of the babe that slept within the manger, and help us now, dear Lady of the Wave. Up to thy shrine we look and see the glimmer, thy golden lamp sheds down on us afar. Light of our eyes, oh let it ne'er grow dimmer, till in the sky we hail the morning star. Then joyful hearts shall kneel around thine altar, and grateful psalms re-echo down the nave. Never our faith in thy sweet power can falter, Mother of God, Our Lady of the Wave.
So
That's dead sad, isn't it? I feel quite weepy now.
that's usually a song that they play every September 8th. I know it's not September 8th itself, but it was the closest I could go. So years of shaving off the tops of sandhills and dunes to fill low spots for building and expand beaches had flattened the island's profile. By mid-afternoon, gale force winds are tearing across the island and was rapidly disappearing underwater. Mammoth swells and monster waves hammer the coast. That obviously tells you right away the hurricane has arrived. Many residents out in the streets are swept off their feet by the rushing floodwaters. Residents, realizing the danger of what was happening, began fleeing in panic. By 12:30 p.m., the streetcars are unable to move, and the water is rising higher with the ocean, threatening to swallow Galveston whole. It didn't even really matter because at this point, it was no longer an island. It was simply now part of the ocean floor. Yeah. At 2:30 p.m. from the weather station at the Levy building, Isaac Klein can see the water rising from the streets downtown. By then, Isaac Klein realized that something extraordinarily wrong was in fact occurring. He then instructs his brother Joseph, with a message for Weather Bureau headquarters in Washington, D.C., that Galveston is in dire straits. Isaac raises the hurricane flag, but by then it was already too late. It reported that half the city was underwater, and Joseph remarked later that he had realized the full extent of the situation. Oh wait, I already said that. Never mind. No planned evacuations were made, and the train trestles and wagon bridge were washed out, making it impossible to leave, even if people wanted to. There was now nowhere to escape. Oh, here's another survivor account.
Our first realization something bad was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You noticed lumber floating by. We could hear the cows mooing, dogs barking, the shouting, and one thing and another. At about 4:30,
all of a sudden, my sister screamed and pointed into the door into the room next door, and that wall was leaving that ceiling. It was going out each time a gust of wind would come.
Okay. Water rose steadily from 3 p.m. until approximately 7:30 p.m. John Blagden, a weather observer at the Galveston Bureau, who at 5:15 p.m. he goes to the Levy building room to take the latest measurements. When he looked at the instruments, he found that the winds were so strong that they had ripped all of the instruments using for measuring velocity from the top of the building. Blagden stays at the weather office while Isaac goes to care for his family. Just how great a calamity was becoming all too apparent by the time Isaac's wading, more than walking, made his way to his home. Water in the streets was waist deep and rising steadily. The timbers that had formed the city's wooden sidewalks floated atop the water like a crust, and winds in excess of 80 miles per hour hurled timbers through the air. When Isaac reached home, he is greeted by his pregnant wife, his 3 daughters, and finds dozens of people and their families, approximately 50 people, already sheltering there, neighbors and strangers who, like the Kleins, saw it as a place of safety. The water was soon 9 feet deep, engulfing the first floor, and the group abandoned it for the second, but the house remained secure against the storm. But there is no safe place in Galveston today. In fact, Isaac Klein's fortress will prove to be one of the worst places in the city. One of the worst places in the city to try and ride out the storm. The winds continue to pick up, and at 100 miles per hour roughly, the wind peels of the surface of the ocean, which results with nothing but white foam flying by along with the rising swells, heavy flooding, and accelerating, intensifying winds. At 5:30 p.m., Isaac's brother Joseph arrives home. He tells Isaac that the storm is gaining strength and believes that staying this close to the coast will mean certain death for everyone. He tries to convince Isaac and everyone that their best chance for survival is to take cover in the center of town towards higher ground, but Isaac declared the safety of the house preferable to the rising waters and flying debris outside, which led to an argument between the brothers. 6:15 p.m. As the two men argue, the winds of the hurricane shift direction. They are now coming from the west. It's a telltale sign that the eye wall, the worst and most destructive part of the storm, has officially arrived. 6:30 p.m. Isaac stands at his door as 120 mile per hour winds shriek past his house. Then this next thing I'm about to read actually gives me goosebumps, to be honest. Then an hour later at 7:30 p.m., Isaac watches in horror as he sees something extraordinary. The water outside the house rises 4 feet in just 4 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Just imagine the feeling he must have got by seeing this. I mean, it had to have been absolutely terrifying to see that. Yeah. The barometer plummets, indicating foul weather ahead. The hurricane brought with a storm surge of over 15 feet that washed over the entire island. An additional 5 feet of water had flowed into portions of the city by 8:30 p.m. The cyclone dropped 9 inches of precipitation in Galveston on September 8th. setting a record for the most rainfall for any 24-hour period in the month of September in the city's history. I believe I got another video. Yep, you got another video right here.
The Gulf looked like a great gray wall about 50 feet high and moving slowly toward the island. My father
Grandmother and aunts and uncles, their houses was just in splinters. The storm, the 1900 storm, just took every trace away.
Now, in the Levy building, John Blagden logs a reading of 28.4 inches, lower than anything the Weather Bureau has seen on land. As the floodwaters surged into St. Mary's Orphanage and collapse of the building appeared imminent, the sisters rushed excuse me. The sisters rushed the children to the second floor of the dormitory. Suddenly, a giant wave crashed into the boys' dormitory where everyone had been just minutes before, in which it collapses and was carried away by the floodwaters, which increased the fear of the children, which they began to scream. While the sisters attempted to calm them down, have them sing Queen of the Waves repeatedly. The sisters had Henry Esquire, a worker, collect clothesline rope. One witness later said that the children were very frightened and the sisters were very brave. The sisters then took the clothesline, cut into sections, and each sister tied to her own body between 6 and 8 children to the cinctures, which they wore around their waists, in an attempt to save these children by keeping them together.
Yeah.
It was a valiant yet sacrificial effort to save the children. Some of the older children climbed onto the roof of the orphanage. The waters filled the first floor, and eventually the dormitory building that had been the sanctuary for the children and sisters was lifted from its foundation, floated briefly, collapsed with the bottom falling out, and the roof came crashing down, trapping the sisters and the children as it sank. Suddenly, the clothesline became a serious liability because while it was holding the kids together, but it also became a great way to get tangled in the debris. All it took was to catch one kid, and it would catch the whole string of kids together. Now, because this happened without warning, there are no photographs of the hurricane in progress. All that's left are artists' interpretations of Galveston being swallowed alive.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, this is a lithograph of the 1900 storm. The survivors are trying to cling on to whatever type of debris or anything that they could use to keep themselves afloat. Before I continue, I'm going to, because I already spoke a lot, I wanted to see if you had anything yourself you'd like to say about this.
Well, everything that you've described, especially, well, with the houses, the buildings, with the water rising as it did and how fast it did. Do you know what? That must have been absolutely terrifying. You'd be petrified, wouldn't you? You wouldn't know where to go, what to do. And then nuns, honestly, they've tried everything to save them children, didn't they?
They did.
How sad was that? I mean, look at that photo, that picture, not the photograph.
Yeah.
And you think you're in there, Nick, you're in that situation, clinging on to anything, you're going to get crushed.
Yep. Well, and to make matters worse, I didn't mention this. I forgot to mention this too, but just imagine the terror that you're feeling, knowing that all telephone and telegraph lines are down. The bridges have all been washed away. The trestle is completely ripped out. You have no means of communication. You have no way to reach out and warn people or try to ask for help. So you are completely alone. And for residents of Galveston, that had to have been the worst feeling they could ever, come to terms with.
Awful.
Just real quick on the comments. What's going on, Joe? Joe's in the comments. Hey, Nikki from Australia. So not much has been going on in the comments, but I just wanted to show them real quick before we continue. So I believe, we got another video here. There's, like I said, there's a couple of these account videos.
My mother could describe the weather like millions of demons overhead. Then she had to get out with
Sounded like a freight train passing over the roof of the house. Water.
She realized that the house was going to pieces around us. We were just waiting for the part we were in to go to pieces.
So, anyways, floodwaters and winds up to 120 miles per hour tear the city apart, brick by brick, piece by piece. When the houses went down, people then got tangled into the debris and drowned. Few streets in the city escaped wind damage, and all streets suffered water damage, with much of the destruction caused by the storm surge. Like I said, all bridges connecting to the island to the mainland were washed away, while approximately 15 miles of railroad track was destroyed. Wind and storm surge also downed electrical, telegraph, and telephone wires. The storm surge swept buildings off their foundations and dismantled them. Many buildings and homes destroyed other structures after being pushed into them by the waves, which even demolished structures built to withstand hurricanes. Oh, we got this. Oh, now this right here is another. It's another interview with. Well, actually, no, I think it might be the same historian that we saw earlier, Linda McDonald. So I'm going to play this next one.
My grandfather.
Oh, actually, no, this is a different descendant.
My grandfather found something to act as a raft. He put his wife and his 5 children on the raft, but there wasn't room for him. So he grabbed the first thing he could grab, which was a piano. And he watched as some of the family were washed overboard and could not do anything to help them.
Yeah, this is probably where we're going to have the most videos. I think there's about 2 or 3 of these small videos. So here's the next one.
My mother, when she realized that the water was going to come in the house, she went out, got an axe. She chopped holes. Water would come up into the house and held the house on the ground.
the house
Yes,
went,
just
just collapsed. We were underwater. I never moved. We just sat there and drifted. We had left the
After that, we were all frightened. My sister and I were the only 2 children. The water kept coming up higher during the storm.
Can I believe? Yeah, I think this is the last one. Well, not the last one out of all of them, but in a row.
The bay water was coming in from the bay. The bay and the Gulf waters were meeting. The tide had come up so high when we entered our
There
home.
was nothing there to stop the water from coming. At that time, the city was below sea level.
Oh, wait. Oh, there's one more. Okay, so this was probably the other one I was saying before that they interview Linda McDonald again.
Other neighbors tried desperately to save themselves and their homes. Linda McDonald's family chops through their floor with axes. Her grandfather was just 6 years old at the time.
He figured they were going to die. He said this had to be madness, chopping through to get to the water. They chopped through and the water came up and it settled down the house.
Years later, her grandfather told Linda about the awful sounds that night and how the houses seemed to cry.
And I said, Grandpa, you're pulling my leg. I said, I know, because houses don't cry. And he said, that night, everyone, everything cried.
Oh.
Inside their home, Isaac and Joseph watch as a sickening collection of debris floats by. And even worse, his house, though still standing, is rapidly filling with water. Now, according to what the brothers had said, what they saw in the water, it was everything. I mean, it was like buildings, it was the remains of houses, it was animals, it was vehicles and horse carts going around. More than the 50 people who've taken cover in his house remain huddled together. But the violent storm surge makes their chances of survival look increasingly grim. 3 blocks from Isaac's house, the storm is tearing at the massive and steel girders of the streetcar railroad trestle, more than 1,000 feet long. Then suddenly, the trestle breaks free and begins spinning and turning, heading in their direction. I mean, this whole piece of trestle was just going back and forth. I mean, it was just spinning like a giant scythe coming directly at him. And Isaac can see this out his window while holding his youngest daughter, 6-year-old Esther Bell, and realizes that the end is near. His brother Joseph grabs 2 of Isaac's children, 12-year-old Allie Mae and 11-year-old Rosemary, and jumps through a window just moments before the trestle smashes into the Klein family home, knocking it off its foundation. The house floats a little ways, then it tilted and sank. Isaac holds on to his pregnant wife, Cora Mae, or in other stories, they say that she tried to reach them, but they are quickly separated, and Isaac watched as Cora Mae becomes tangled in the debris and trapped in the debris that had moments earlier been their home and taken under as the house sinks.
Oh.
Isaac is then thrown underwater as he is crushed under debris. There was no way for him to escape, and he begins to drown and says his goodbyes to the world. Then, miraculously, somehow he is freed, most likely by some motion in the water, and finds himself on the surface. In the lightning flash, he sees his youngest daughter, Esther Bell, and begins to ride on a raft of debris. Hundreds of people are thrown from their homes into the dark, raging water. Other residents climb to the second stories, attics, and even roofs of their homes, which was still a deadly trap, as flying debris struck many who dared venture outside their homes. I mean, that's being out. It's not the storm surge you got to worry about. It's all that debris. I mean,
yeah,
you get hit by one of those, you're seriously injured or you're dying a much brutal death.
Yeah.
So, okay. A river of debris rolls across the island. The Tremont Hotel, where hundreds of people sought refuge during the storm, was severely damaged. All public buildings also suffered damage, including City Hall, which was completely de-roofed, a city gas works, a city waterworks, and the Custom House. The Grand Opera House also sustained extensive damage. 3 schools and St. Mary's University were nearly destroyed. Many places of worship in the city also received severe damage or were completely demolished. Of the 39 churches in Galveston, 25 experienced complete destruction, while the others received some degree of damage. The island of Galveston is now completely underwater, and the storm surge isn't the only killer. Many of the roofs throughout the city are covered, I didn't mention this, are covered with slate and sharp tiles, which are now being thrown aloft by gusts, now up to 140 miles per hour. Houses along the beachfront were lifted from their foundations and sent like battering rams into other houses. I mean, yeah, just imagine this huge amount of water, millions of tons of weight. And, like I said, it's just like a huge battering ram where they would just constantly hit like one house or building, then it would slam into the next building, to the next building, to the next building.
Like a domino effect, isn't it?
Very much like a domino effect. And all these tiles, it's like a medieval team of archers that are just going around and trying to hit their targets, if you will. And again, the results of people getting hit by these slate and sharp tiles, I mean, that, like I said, that was a much more brutal way to die. Yeah. At St. Mary's Infirmary, the floodwaters filled the first floor. From the second story balcony, this is not the orphanage, this was the infirmary. Yeah. The sisters pulled refugees in as they floated by and brought them into the overcrowded hospital. They had no food or water, however. Almost every window in the facility was broken, sending the wind and rain whipping through the building. While the main hospital was still standing, the adjacent structures had been destroyed. At places the wall of debris was 2 stories high. Inside this great wall were destroyed houses, pieces of furniture, pots, pans, cats, dogs, and people. Those who were dead, and most of them were those who were dead or those who were dying. And can you imagine just the amount of the sounds that occurred that night? I mean, the sounds that night had to have been horrific. They said
nightmare sounds, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you had children screaming for their mothers, women crying out for help, men begging for mercy from God. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, those sounds would just stop immediately. That tells you immediately
Yeah.
someone's
They're all
life.
gone.
Yep, someone's life had ended. It was over for them. Now, going back to the Klein brothers, Joseph Klein manages to climb onto a raft with 2 of Isaac's 3 children. In another lightning flash, Isaac then could see his brother and his 2 other daughters. They managed to unite and reach each other onto the raft of debris in the howling wind, with sounds of mayhem all around them, such as buildings being destroyed and shrieking of people. Isaac clutches his 3 daughters, breathless with relief that they're still alive. But Isaac's wife, Cora May, is nowhere to be seen. Years later, Joseph would write about that awful day. And I got a video involving that account.
Joseph's grandson Jerry reads the memoir, telling of how, during Joseph's darkest hour, he sees something almost too good to be true.
My heart suddenly leaped with uncontrollable joy. In 2 figures that clung to the drift, I discovered my brother and his youngest child. In some miraculous manner, they had escaped alive from the house of doom. Only the mother, one of the dearest of women, was gone.
The destructive wave makes its way from the Gulf side of the island towards the center of town. As it gathers its deadly cargo, the wall grows bigger, stronger, and heavier. Surprisingly, and eventually, it created the one thing Galveston desperately needed but did not have. So, as you can see in this picture, so much debris had accumulated along a certain line of the city that I'm actually pointing out right now, that it actually created a breakwater protecting the interior of Galveston in the region of partial destruction from the worst effects of the storm.
Wow.
Finally, after 12 hours of merciless assault, the winds die down. Before dawn, waters that had risen as high as 15 feet below sea level begins to recede. We're only just going to do a couple more slides because we actually are getting to the halfway point, or probably more than halfway point, if you will, where usually I stop. So I'm just going to continue on with what happened with the rest of the track of the storm, and then after that, we're gonna end it until next week.
Okay.
So, and I'm also talking about something that's normally never discussed about very often, of what happened to the storm after it left Galveston. After moving northward from Texas into Oklahoma territory, the storm produced winds of near 30 miles per hour at Oklahoma City. The extratropical remnants of the cyclone then re-intensified to the equivalence of a tropical storm and continued to strengthen, bringing strong waves to the Midwestern United States. High winds in Missouri toppled a brick wall under construction in St. Joseph, killing a man and severely injuring another. This part, I still find, the next note that's going to come up, I still find this awfully hard to believe, but believe it or not, it's like this storm wanted to live long enough that it actually came into my own, excuse me, it actually came into my own area. So in Illinois, particularly hard hit was the city of Chicago. Obviously, living in Chicago myself, we were in the path of the storm, believe it or not. Which experienced wind gusts up to 84 miles per hour. Thousands of dollars in damage occurred to roofs, trees, signs, and windows. Several people were injured, and 2 deaths occurred in the city, one from a live wire, and the other was a drowning after a boat capsized in Lake Michigan. In Wisconsin, a bateau with 18 people on board sank in the Eau Claire River, drowning 6 men and nearly taking the lives of the others. Heavy rains fell in parts of Minnesota. The Minneapolis-St. Paul area recorded 4.23 inches of precipitation over a period of 16 hours. Farther north, several washouts occurred, especially in the northern areas of the state. A bridge, along with a few train cars, were swept away during a washout in Cold Spring. In Michigan, the storm produced winds around 60 miles per hour at Muskegon. Tides from Lake Michigan were the highest in several months. According to the Times-Herald, the city of Marshall experienced the severest windstorm of the season, which uprooted trees and damaged several buildings. Throughout the state, winds left at least $12,000 in damage in losses to peach orchards, with many peach trees uprooted. Significant losses to apples and pears also occurred. Rough seas in Lake Erie resulted in several maritime incidents offshore Ohio. The John B. Leon, a 255-foot steamer, capsized above 5 miles north of Conneaut. I don't know if I'm saying that right. 14 out of 16 crew members drowned. A survivor suggested that the ship being overloaded may have been a factor in its sinking. About 10 miles farther north, the schooner Dundee sank, causing at least one death. In another incident nearby, the steamer City of Erie, with about 300 passengers aboard, was hit by a wave that swept over the bulwarks. The engine slowed, and the steamers later reached safety in Canada with no lives lost. In Toledo, strong winds disrupted telegraph services. Winds also blew water out of parts of the Maumee River and Maumee Bay to such an extent that they were impassable by vessels due to low water levels. A number of vessels were buried in mud several feet deep, while about 20 others were beached. So this was the continued projected path of the remains of the hurricane. So, of the many cities in New York affected by the remnants of the hurricane, Buffalo was among the hardest hit. There, winds peaked at 78 miles per hour, downing hundreds of electrical, telegraph, and telephone wires, while numerous trees toppled and some branches fell onto roadways. An oil derrick blew away and landed on the roof of a house, crushing the roof and nearly killing the occupants. A newly built ironworks building was virtually destroyed, causing a loss of about $10,000. At the Pan American Exposition, the storm damaged several structures, including part of the government building, while 2 towers were destroyed. Losses at the exposition alone were conservatively estimated at $75,000. And this is actually this is a rare photograph. This was one of the very few photographs I was able to find of the destruction of the storm outside of Galveston. So I couldn't believe that I was able to find a photo of this. I didn't think I was going to find any other than what I'll show next week of the aftermath of Galveston.
Yeah.
One death occurred in Buffalo after a woman inadvertently touched a down electrical wire skewered by debris. Several nearby resorts received extensive damage. At Woodlawn Beach, several dozens of small boats and a pier were destroyed. Nearly all the vessels owned by the Buffalo Canoe Club suffered severe damage or destruction at Crystal Beach. A toboggan slide and a restaurant were also destroyed. Losses in Crystal Beach reached about $5,000. Heavy crop losses occurred over western New York, with fallen apples and peaches completely covering the ground at thousands of acres of orchards. Losses reportedly ranged in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The rapidly moving storm was still exhibiting winds of 65 miles per hour while passing well north of New York City on September 12th. The New York Times reported that pedestrian walking became difficult and attributed one death to the storm. A sign pole, snapped by the wind, landed on a 23-year-old man, crushing his skull and killing him instantly. Yeah, while 2 others were knocked unconscious. Awnings and signs on many buildings broke, and the canvas roofing at the fire department headquarters was blown off. Closer to the waterfront, along the Battery seawall, waves and tides were reported to be some of the highest in recent memory of the fishermen and sailors. Spray and debris were thrown over the wall, making walking along the waterfront dangerous. Small craft in New York Harbor were thrown off course, and tides and currents in the Hudson River made navigation difficult. In Brooklyn, the New York Times reported that trees were uprooted, signs and similar structures were blown down, and yaks were torn from moorings, with some suffering severe damage. Because of the direction of the wind, Coney Island escaped the fury of the storm. though a bathing pavilion at Bath Beach suffered damage from wind and waves. I believe I just got 2 slides left. Again, no fade in for some reason. In Connecticut, winds gusted up to about 40 miles per hour. The apple crops, already in danger by drought conditions, suffered damage, with the Boston Globe noting that there was hardly an apple left on a tree in the entire state. In the town of Orange, 12 large tents at a fair were ripped. At another fair in New Milford, 15 tents collapsed, forcing closure of the fair. Along the coast, the storm produced abnormally high tides, with tides reaching their highest heights in 6 years at Westbrook. Water reached the bulkheads and remained there for several hours. In Rhode Island, the storm left damage in the vicinity of Providence. Telegraph and telephone services were interrupted. But not to such a large extent. Some small crafts in Narragansett Bay received damage, while apple orchards experienced slight losses. Lightning produced by the storm ignited several brush fires in Massachusetts, particularly in the southeastern portions of the state, with winds spreading the flames. In Plymouth and other nearby towns, some residents evacuated from the fires by boat. Most cottages around the Big Long, Gallows, Halfway, and Little Long ponds were reduced to burning coals. In Everett, orchards in the Woodlawn section suffered complete losses of fruit. 2 wooden frame buildings were demolished, while winds also toppled fences throughout the city. Winds damaged many telephone and electric wires in Cambridge. A lineman sent to fix the electrical wires nearly died when a pole snapped during a fierce wind gust. Orchards in the city suffered near complete loss, and many shade trees were also damaged. At least a few chimneys toppled, and several others were left leaning. A bathhouse at Harvard University lost a portion of its tin roof and its copper cornices. At Cape Cod, a wind speed of 45 miles per hour were observed at Highland Light in North Truro. Waves breached the sand dunes at multiple locations along the Cape, with water sweeping across a county road at Beach Point in North Truro. A number of fishing boats sank, and several fish houses received severe damage. 1 man drowned in a lake near Andover while canoeing during the storm. Strong winds in Vermont generated rough seas in Lake Champlain. Early reports indicated that a schooner sunk near Adams Ferry with no survivors, but the vessel was later found safely anchored at Westport, New York. According to a man near the lake, all the water from the New York portion of the lake was blown to the Vermont side, crashing ashore in waves as high as 15 to 20 feet. In the state capital of Montpelier, several large trees at the State House were uprooted. Within Montpelier and vicinity, farmers suffered some losses to apples and corn. Telephone and telegraph services were almost completely cut off. In Vergennes, I don't know if I'm saying that right, a number of telephone wires snapped, while many apples, pears, and plums were blown off the trees. Additional damage to fruit and shade trees occurred in Middlebury and Winooski. The city of Burlington experienced its worst storm in many years. Winds downed all telephone and telegraph lines, whereas many trees had severe damage. Some homes were de-roofed. In New Hampshire, the storm left wind damage to the city of Nausea. Winds tore roofs off a number of buildings, with several roofs landing on the streets or telephone wires. Chimneys in each section of the city collapsed. Many people narrowly escaped injury or death. In Nausea, the nearby cities of Brooklyn and Hollis, thousands of dollars in losses occurred to apple crops, described as practically ruined. The city of Manchester was affected by one of the most furious windstorms which visited the city in years. Telephone and telegraph communications were nearly completely out for several hours, while windows shattered and trees snapped. Street railway traffic experienced delays. In Maine, the storm downed trees and chimneys and caused property damage in the vicinity of Biddeford. Damage from the storm throughout the United States exceeded $34 million. And finally, like I said, I think this is the last one. From September 12th to September 14th, The extratropical remnants of the Galveston hurricane has affected 6 Canadian provinces, resulting in severe damage and extensive loss of life. In Ontario, the storm surge in Lake Ontario ranged from 8 to 10 feet, wreaking havoc on vessels, breaching several boats, destroying a number of boats, and setting some others adrift. Many other vessels canceled or postponed their departures. Winds reached as high as 77 miles per hour in Toronto, breaking windows throughout the city. A fire broke out in a flour mill in Paris, and the flames were fanned by the storm, resulting in $350,000 in damage to the mill and 50 other stores and offices. High winds downed electrical, telegraph, and telephone lines in many areas. Total crop damage in Ontario alone amounted to $1 million. Impact to crops was particularly severe at St. Catharines, where many apple, peach, pear, and plum orchards were extensively damaged, with a loss of thousands of dollars. One person died in Niagara Falls when a man attempted to remove debris from a pump station, but he was swept away into the river instead. Maximum rainfall in Canada reached 3.9 inches in Pierce, Quebec. In Nova Scotia, damage was reported in the Halifax area. Plethora of fences and trees fell over, while windows shattered and a house under construction collapsed. 2 schooners were driven ashore at Sydney, and a brigantine was also breached at Cape Breton Island. Another schooner, known as Greta, capsized offshore Cape Breton Island near Low Point, with the fate of the crew being unknown. On Prince Edward Island, a few barns, a windmill, and a lobster factory were destroyed. Falling trees down about 40 electrical wires. A house suffered damage after its own chimney fell and collapsed through the roof. Strong winds also tossed a boxcar from its track. A bridge and wharf at St. Peter's Bay were damaged. Fruit crops were almost entirely ruined throughout Prince Edward Island. The majority of loss of life in Canada occurred due to numerous shipwrecks off the coast of St. Pierre and Miquelon, Newfoundland, and Prince Edward Island. The overall death toll in Canadian waters is estimated to be between 52 and 232, making this at least the 8th deadliest hurricane to affect Canada. The large discrepancy between the fatality figures is due to the fact that many people were reported missing. Thus, the exact number of deaths is unknown. We'll never know the true amount of deaths in Canada.
Wow.
And finally, after striking Newfoundland later that day, the extratropical storm entered the far north Atlantic Ocean and weakened, with the remnants last observed near Iceland on Saturday, September 15th, before finally dissipating.
Wow.
Yeah, this is where. So this is where we're gonna stop, actually, because we'll hold off until next week. Just real quick, just want to get to the comments.
Sorry, guys. I do apologise. I have been flagging them up and down. I do apologise. That's just me.
Yeah.
Robert says not all that odd. Cyclones here can start on the west coast and cross all the way to the east coast. That's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
And can I honestly say, guys, you've done really, really well. I was really, really proud of you. I was listening in the background, even though I've had shit going the night go off, that I was listening, and I found it really, really interesting. So well done, Nick and Lynn.
Do you know what? I just absolutely love that. I love storytelling. We were talking about this before, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I just absolutely love interestingly. This is just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and all the descriptions of everything that you've gone through, I was imagining in my mind because you was making it go there. I was living through all of what you've said there, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic, Nick. I did, honestly, amazing.
I'm glad you guys find this fasting.
Thank
Because like
you.
I said, this really means a lot to me. And then of course, next week is probably going to be the most difficult part because then we're going to be talking about the aftermath, and that's where things get really sad very quickly. I mean, what you saw already was sad enough, but just wait until next week.
Wow.
Definitely. So tomorrow night, guys.
Lori, not many comments. Too busy. Well, you know, Lori, I gotta say, even if for those who who are just listening, I still really appreciate that. Seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Where was I going? I can't even remember.
Tomorrow night.
Yeah,
Tomorrow night. Sorry, my brain is mush. Tomorrow night, guys, we have Richard Russell, and we've got Nick's favourite. My Irish demon is coming on.
Jenny's coming on. Haven't seen her in a
Jenny's
while.
coming on tomorrow night. So it will be a good night. But we will tune in tomorrow, guys. Next week will be part 2 of the presentation. And don't even ask me about next Friday. We can talk about that tomorrow night. But everyone have a good night. My special guest has arrived a day early. Oh, yay! Wayne, I'm looking forward to it. I just don't like you because you don't tell me nothing. You keep me in suspense.
Yeah, I wonder who that.
Like
you know what? You've
I'm-
got to tell me, Wayne, because I'm not here.
I'm kind of scared of who this. I'm kind of scared of who this guest is.
Yeah. I'm not here tomorrow. I've got to work till
I say this a lot, but
Nick.
I always say this a lot. When there's some mystery guest that's going to come on, I get kind of scared about it. I often say, I often say, should I get an adult?
do you know? Sometimes, oh boy, you're going to laugh your pants off tomorrow night. He's a right character. Oh, you're making me wonder. Right, anyway, I'm not playing this game with you anymore. Right, folks, we'll see you tomorrow night. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.